I know that was cheesy, but it's just a placeholder. I'll come up with something better soon. Welcome to The Outer Rim, your go-to place for deep dives into the Star Wars galaxy. Today we're taking an in-depth look at one of the most iconic characters in Star Wars history, Boba Fett. But we're not talking about the ruthless, silent bounty hunter we remember from The Empire Strikes Back. No. Today we're exploring the Boba Fett we see in the Book of Boba Fett and his evolution into something new, something complex. We're going to break down what Boba Fett's time with the Tusken Raiders meant, how it shaped him, and what his change might mean for his future, or if he even has a future in the galaxy story moving forward. I promised to return after the spooky season. Well, here I am. This is the first video under our rebranding of The Outer Rim, formerly Star Wars Fanatic. I feel like this could be a positive change for the channel, but we'll see how it goes. But I want to thank all of you who gave name suggestions for the channel and those who voted on the new names. There were some really great suggestions out there. I especially want to thank Alien Jesus 7235 for the Outer Rim name. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to make us as big as the real Outer Rim. Now, let's dive right into the heart of Boba Fett's transformation. To understand the impact of Boba Fett's time with the Tuskens, we have to start with the Boba Fett we used to know. Boba Fett has always been an enigma, a silent figure in the background who let his reputation and his armor do the talking. He was a lone bounty hunter, someone who valued his independence above all. Sure, we saw him partner with other hunters from time to time, whether it was Bossk, Dengar, or others. But those partnerships were alliances of convenience, not trust. These partnerships would inevitably sour. There were always betrayal, always someone with their own agenda. In this world of bounty hunters, loyalty was a weakness and trust was a trap. This taught Boba Fett one thing. In his line of work, you couldn't count on anyone but yourself. This Boba Fett didn't need anyone, or at least that's what he thought. The only code he followed was survival, and he survived by being alone. He was the quintessential lone wolf. But in the Book of Boba Fett, everything changes. When we first see Boba Fett in the Book of Boba Fett, he's a broken man. He's stripped of his armor, his strength, and even his freedom, captured by a tribe of Tusken Raiders. Now remember, in the Star Wars galaxy, Tuskens are largely seen as ruthless savages. They're the creatures who attacked Luke Skywalker and kidnapped Shmi Skywalker. They're misunderstood, feared, and despised by much of Tatooine's inhabitants. But Boba Fett's initial relationship with the Tuskens isn't just as a captive. It's the beginning of a transformation, a rebirth, if you will. At first, he's tied up, vulnerable, with no choice but to learn their ways or die. What's remarkable here is that rather than trying to escape immediately, Boba observes. He learns. In his quiet way, he starts to adapt to their culture. Slowly, he earns their trust, and they start to accept him. And in doing so, he learns that the Tuskens are much more than ruthless raiders he might have once seen them as. They're a tribe, a family, who live by a code of honor and loyalty. For Boba Fett, this experience is entirely new. The Tuskens teach Boba Fett something he's never understood before, the strength that comes from being a part of a tribe. For the first time, he's not just a lone bounty hunter on the move. He's part of a collective. He's someone with a place, a role, a duty. The tribe gives him a purpose beyond just survival, and this is something entirely foreign to Boba Fett. In learning their ways, Boba doesn't just adapt to survive, he genuinely begins to respect them. He realizes that true strength doesn't always come from standing alone. Sometimes it comes from standing together. With the Tuskens, he learns combat techniques, survival skills, and gains a respect for the land itself. This isn't the same Boba Fett who once tracked down and captured his prey with cold precision. This is a Boba Fett who has learned the value of community. But just as Boba starts to feel a sense of belonging, tragedy strikes. His tribe, his new family, is wiped out. The Tuskens, who have accepted him as one of their own, are slaughtered in a brutal raid. Boba Fett returns to find their camp in ruins and his people gone. For a man who has spent his entire life losing everyone he's ever known, this loss is monumental. He was finally finding something worth fighting for beyond credits or reputation, and it's taken from him. In a single moment, he's returned to the isolation he thought he'd left behind. This isn't just a loss for Boba Fett. It's a heartbreak that shatters the new life he'd started to build. And we see it on his face, in his silence, in the way he walks through the ashes of what could have been his future. It's a heartbreaking reminder of the loneliness he's known all his life. And yet, despite this loss, Boba Fett doesn't go back to being the cold bounty hunter. Instead, he takes the lessons the Tuskens taught him, and he decides to build something even greater. We know all this background, don't we? But we're going to continue anyway. The impact of Boba Fett's time with the Tuskens isn't just in the story. It's in the atmosphere of these scenes. The music that accompanies his time with the tribe is haunting, a mix of traditional Star Wars elements with a more primal, earthy tone. It echoes Boba Fett's journey as he sheds the armor of his old life and embraces something new. The lighting, too, shifts from the harsh, unforgiving sun of Tatooine to the softer, shadowed hues of the Tusken encampment, creating a visual divide between his past and this new chapter. These choices create a unique rhythm for Boba Fett's arc with the Tuskens. It's not rushed, it feels almost sacred, an invitation to understand a culture that has often been shown as brutal and hostile. The creative team behind these scenes uses the music and lighting to build an emotional depth that makes us, the audience, feel Boba's transformation on a visceral level. Now let's dig deeper into the allegorical layer of this story. Boba Fett's time with the Tuskens isn't just a story about his personal transformation. No, it's a commentary on the dangers of preconceived notions. In the Star Wars galaxy, the Tuskens are often seen as savages. They're viewed as violent outsiders who live on the fringes of society, and few have ever tried to understand them. But Boba Fett's journey shows us that these preconceived notions are limiting. By opening himself to the Tuskens' ways, he learns that they are more than the violent tribe they've often been depicted as. They have a code, a culture, and a way of life that's deeply connected to Tatooine itself. Through Boba Fett's eyes, we're invited to see the Tuskens in a new light. Not as mindless raiders, but as people with their own history and values. This is a powerful reminder that understanding and respect can break down even the strongest barriers of hostility. This leads us to the question, has Boba Fett evolved forward or backward as a character? Some might argue that becoming part of a tribe and moving away from his lone hunter lifestyle is a regression, a step away from the fearsome reputation he's built. Others might see it as a forward evolution, a growth that turns him into something greater than just a bounty hunter. Perhaps he's no longer interested in being feared. Perhaps he wants to be respected, not for his armor or his blaster, but for the strength of his character. This change is monumental, and it's a question we don't yet have all the answers to. Is he moving forward by abandoning his old ways, or is he losing himself in the process? Only time will tell. So, here we are, Boba Fett transformed by this time with the Tuskens, and a character who's evolved beyond the image we have had of him. And yet, since the Book of Boba Fett, he's been notably absent from other Star Wars shows. We've seen the rise of Din Djarin, Grogu's adventures, Ahsoka Tano's return, and even the mention of Thrawn's impending threat. But where is Boba Fett in all of this? As the galaxy barrels toward the climactic events hinted in The Mandalorian and Ahsoka, it begins the question, will Boba Fett have a role to play in the inevitable showdown? Has he truly retired from the galaxy's wars, or is he just waiting for the right moment to return or be drawn in by some unseen force? Certainly, he's an additional segment that further enriches the analysis while keeping it distinct from the points already discussed. And it would be stupid not to mention another key part of Boba Fett's evolution in the Book of Boba Fett, and that's his changing relationship with his armor. Throughout Star Wars history, Boba Fett's armor is practically synonymous with his identity. The Mandalorian armor symbolizes intimidation, fear, and his reputation as a top-tier bounty hunter. In The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, we rarely saw Boba Fett without it. Well, we didn't see him without it. But in the collection of short stories from another point of view during the time of The Empire Strikes Back, it goes into a narrative of Boba Fett sitting on his ship, the Slave One. Yeah, I said it. And he talks about feeling his face and needing a shave. But for him, the armor was like a second skin, something he wore as both physical and psychological barrier. But after he loses his armor to the Jawas, we start to see Boba as something more vulnerable. Stripped of his armor, he becomes a man forced to rely on his wits, his instincts, and the skills the Tuskens teach him. He learns to fight in a different way, to wield new weapons, and even to adapt his view of himself. In essence, he's rediscovering who he is beneath that Mandalorian shell. When Boba Fett eventually reclaims his armor, we notice a shift. Boba no longer seems to hide behind it, nor does he cling to it as a defining element of his identity. Instead, it becomes a tool he uses to protect others and uphold the new code he's adopted. This shift from armor as identity to armor as purpose is subtle, but it marks a significant evolution in Boba Fett's character. He's no longer driven by a need to uphold his reputation. Instead, he seeks to honor the Tuskens and the values they imparted to him. Boba Fett's time with the Tuskens doesn't just change him, it changes the broader Star Wars narrative. His experience adds a new perspective on how the galaxy's fringes are viewed. Throughout Star Wars, characters on the fringes, especially those who belong to so-called tribal societies like the Tuskens, are often marginalized or even demonized. They're seen as obstacles or enemies, rarely as allies or complex individuals. But Boba Fett's journey suggests a turning point in how Star Wars can portray these groups. By showing Boba Fett's empathy for and integration with the Tuskens, the series challenges the way outsiders are represented and encourages viewers to question preconceived notions about any culture seen as other. It's a refreshing expansion on Star Wars' central themes of acceptance, redemption, and seeing beyond appearances. Boba Fett's story with the Tuskens opens the door for future Star Wars stories to explore other marginalized groups, like the Night Sisters, the inhabitants of Peridea, or even the Zeffo from Jedi Fallen Order. His transformation is both a personal arc and a potential roadmap for where Star Wars storytelling could go next, highlighting the depth and beauty that can come from exploring these so-called savage tribes as complex, honorable communities. Now let's consider Boba Fett's legacy. Before the Book of Boba Fett, his legacy was built on fear and mystery. He was a figure who loomed in the background, feared by his enemies and admired by fans for his ruthlessness and really a cool look. But this new chapter gives us a different kind of legacy, a Boba Fett who is respected for his wisdom and the honor he upholds, not just the reputation his armor represents. As he walks away from the ashes of the Tusken tribe, Boba Fett emerges as a character with a renewed sense of purpose. He's no longer just a weapon in Mandalorian armor. He's a protector of those who can't protect themselves, a leader willing to embrace the lessons of his past to create a new future and learn from newer lessons. And that brings us back to the question we left with earlier. Will Boba Fett's new perspective and purpose give him a role in the galaxy's larger conflicts? Will he rise once more to defend the underdogs and stand up against the Empire or other rising powers? Or has his journey ended, leaving him to be a quiet protector on Tatooine, away from the galaxy's endless wars? And that's the question we'll leave you with today. Will we see Boba Fett rise again as part of the grand culmination in the Mandalorian movie, or has his story come to an end, leaving the galaxy to move on without him and his fans? Let us know your thoughts below. Do you want to see Boba Fett return, or is his story complete? Thanks for joining us on The Outer Rim. Make sure to subscribe for more deep dives into the Star Wars universe, and as always, may the Force be with you.